the historical evolution of fashion marketing and the advent of generative AI. Let us begin. When we talk about the history of fashion marketing, we are not merely tracing the advertisements of dresses or the posters of shoes. We are, in fact, tracing the history of how societies imagine themselves, how they communicate aspiration, and how technologies of communication recast desire into material consumption. To situate our discussion, I want to frame the narrative as a movement across four epochs. First, the roots of fashion advertising in the 19th century. Second, the rise of global branding in the late 20th century. Third, the digital disruption at the turn of the 21st century. And finally, the emergence of generative artificial intelligence as a paradigm shift in our present moment. Each epoch represents both continuity and rupture. Continuity in the basic impulse to shape identity through clothing, rupture in the methods, the scales, and the logics of representation. 19th century origins. Let us step back to the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution had already transformed the production of textiles. Steam-powered looms and mechanized sewing allowed garments to be manufactured at a pace never before imagined. But production alone does not create markets. Marketing becomes the bridge. Early fashion advertising arose in magazines and in illustrated catalogs. Consider Harper's Bazaar, founded in 1867, or the Sears Roebuck catalog in the 1890s. These publications transformed what had once been local tailor shop economies into trans-regional systems of aspiration. A woman in Ohio could suddenly see the fashions of Paris. Illustration, pen and ink, lithograph, eventually photography, served as the medium. Notice the key dynamic here. Advertising did not merely inform, it aspirationalized. It created what sociologist Thorstein Veblen, in The Theory of the Leisure Class published in 1899, would call conspicuous consumption. To advertise fashion was to cultivate longing and to equate clothing with social mobility. And yet, these advertisements were deeply gendered. They were aimed largely at women, casting them as both consumers and carriers of social display. The irony is that men controlled the industries of production, but women became the symbolic terrain of marketing. This asymmetry continues, in modified form, into our own age. The rise of global brands. Fast forward to the late 20th century. Here we encounter what I would call the era of the logo. After World War II, prosperity in the West expanded consumer markets. But by the 1970s and 1980s, fashion marketing began to consolidate around the power of brands rather than mere products. Companies such as Gucci, Ralph Lauren, and Nike did not simply sell garments, they sold lifestyles. The polo horse, the swoosh, the interlocking G's, these became universal symbols, instantly recognizable across borders. Two forces explain this shift. The first is the growth of global media channels, television, glossy magazines like Vogue and Elle, later MTV in the 1980s. These allowed a logo to circulate worldwide. The second is the financialization of fashion houses, mergers, conglomerates, and luxury groups such as LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, which aggregated brands and invested heavily in marketing campaigns with cinematic quality. Think of the Calvin Klein advertisements of the 1990s, minimalistic, provocative, and designed to shock, to seduce, to embed themselves into cultural memory. Global branding thus represents a continuity with 19th century aspiration, fashion as a vehicle of identity, but also a rupture. Because now, the consumer was not buying a dress, the consumer was buying a sign system. Semiotics became central. Marketing theorists like Jean Baudrillard emphasized that commodities no longer function only as objects but as signs, and the logo became a floating signifier, detached from the material shirt or shoe, capable of infinite replication. Digital disruption. By the 1990s and 2000s, we encounter the digital revolution. The internet destabilized the traditional power of print magazines and television advertisements. Suddenly, marketing became interactive, data-driven, and algorithmically mediated. Search engines like Google, social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and later TikTok, shifted the dynamics from one-to-many broadcasting toward many-to-many networks. Fashion bloggers, and eventually influencers, disrupted the monopoly of centralized fashion editors. A 19-year-old with a blog could rival Vogue in shaping taste. The continuity here is again aspiration. Fashion still promised status, novelty, identity. But the rupture was in the speed and granularity of targeting. Marketers could now track clicks, segment demographics, personalize emails, and run A/B tests. By 2010, programmatic advertising allowed for the automated buying of ad slots, meaning that fashion companies could pursue consumers with uncanny precision. The line between editorial content and advertising blurred. An Instagram post could be both personal expression and paid placement. The paradox, however, is that as visibility increased, so too did saturation. Consumers became weary of overexposure, skeptical of constant advertising. Thus, digital disruption opened the door for something new, a form of marketing that could feel personalized, creative, even co-authored by the consumer. And here, generative artificial intelligence enters. Generative AI as paradigm shift. Now we arrive at our current moment, the era of generative AI. Unlike previous technologies that were primarily channels of distribution, magazines, television, social media, generative AI transforms the production of content itself. A brand can now generate thousands of ad variations in seconds. A neural network can merge a vintage sewing machine with a futuristic cityscape, or imagine models wearing garments that do not physically exist yet. Tools like DALL-E, Midjourney, or Stable Diffusion allow for infinite visual experimentation. Large language models can script ad copy in multiple languages simultaneously. Video generation tools simulate runway shows without a single human model. What makes this a paradigm shift is not merely speed or cost reduction, though those are significant. It is that generative AI blurs the line between creator and consumer. A consumer can now input prompts and co-create imagery with the brand. Marketing becomes not just a message broadcast, but a dialogical, participatory process. Furthermore, generative AI recasts historical cycles of creativity. In the 19th century, artists drew illustrations. In the 20th, photographers staged cinematic shoots. In the 21st, algorithms learn from vast corpora and generate new hybrids. The human remains present, but the locus of authorship shifts toward the system. There is continuity here. Fashion still relies on image, fantasy, identity. But there is rupture. Marketing ceases to be about scarcity of imagery and becomes about curation of abundance. When millions of images can be generated, the strategic task becomes: which narratives resonate, which images cut through, which prompts embody authenticity. Continuity and rupture. Across epochs. Let me emphasize the larger analytical arc. Across 2 centuries, fashion marketing has oscillated between 2 poles: continuity in the aspiration to define self through clothing, rupture in the technological means by which that aspiration is mediated. The 19th century gave us illustrations in print. The 20th gave us logos and global branding. The digital era gave us networks, influencers, and algorithmic targeting. And the generative era gives us systems that themselves create content. Each technological epoch has not eradicated the prior. Rather, they layer. Magazines still exist, logos remain powerful, influencers thrive. But the center of gravity shifts, and each shift reshapes consumer engagement. The consumer in 1890 gazed at an illustration with awe. The consumer in 1990 internalized the logo as a badge of belonging. The consumer in 2010 interacted with an influencer in real time. The consumer in 2025 can co-author campaigns with AI. Conclusion. So, what does this mean? It means that fashion marketing is not merely a technical practice of selling clothes. It is a cultural barometer, registering how societies imagine identity, status, and creativity at different technological thresholds. Generative AI marks not just an incremental change, but a paradigmatic one, the move from advertising to the consumer toward creating with the consumer. In closing, I encourage us to think of these epochs not as a linear march of progress, but as cycles of invention, saturation, and transformation. Fashion marketing is history written in fabric and pixels, in ink and algorithms. And the advent of generative AI is our latest chapter, one that both continues the long lineage of aspiration and ruptures it in ways we are only beginning to grasp. Thank you. When we think of generative artificial intelligence in the realm of fashion, we often default to the most visible applications: the AI-generated runway images circulating online, the synthetic influencers gracing Instagram, or the speculative renderings of garments that have never been stitched. But I want to argue that the true revolution is subtler and deeper. Generative AI is becoming not just a tool, but a creative collaborator. This lecture explores that collaboration across several dimensions: pattern generation, color forecasting, silhouette experimentation, the enduring tension between human intuition and algorithmic creativity, concrete case studies of brands experimenting with AI, the shifting philosophy of authorship, and the ethical dilemmas around originality and plagiarism. AI as co-designer in pattern generation. Let us begin with pattern. Historically, pattern design in fashion required a fusion of technical skill and artistic imagination. A designer would sketch, cut, repeat motifs, and laboriously test visual coherence. Today, an AI model trained on thousands, even millions of textile archives can generate countless variations within seconds. The human designer can input a prompt, Baroque floral with cyberpunk edges, or geometric repetition in the style of Bauhaus, but softened with organic curves, and the AI produces dozens of plausible options. The collaboration lies in the iterative dialogue. The designer does not relinquish authorship, but uses the algorithm as a sparring partner. Each output is not a finished product, but a provocation. In this sense, AI serves as a co-designer of possibility space, expanding the terrain of what can be imagined, surfacing latent patterns that no single mind could have drawn unaided. Color forecasting. Next, color. Fashion has long relied on color forecasting agencies such as Pantone, WGSN, and other trend bureaus to anticipate what shades will resonate in the coming seasons. These forecasts are based on cultural analysis, consumer psychology, and aesthetic intuition. Generative AI adds another layer, predictive analytics informed by massive datasets. By scraping social media images, runway archives, and even satellite photography of urban environments, AI can detect emergent color palettes with extraordinary granularity. But the key here is not simply prediction, it is synthesis. AI can generate new palettes that feel simultaneously novel and historically resonant, blending archival shades with futuristic tones. The designer then must decide, do these algorithmic proposals align with human mood and cultural zeitgeist? The tension between machine-detected trends and human emotional resonance becomes the site of creativity. Silhouette experimentation. Silhouettes represent perhaps the boldest frontier. Traditional silhouette experimentation involves draping fabric on mannequins, testing proportions, cutting and recutting. With generative AI, designers can now explore hundreds of silhouettes virtually. Algorithms trained on centuries of fashion, from 19th century bustles to 21st century streetwear, can propose hybrids. Imagine a neural network that merges the waistline of Dior's new look with the oversized geometry of Balenciaga's recent collections. Again, the designer's role is crucial. The AI can offer structural possibilities, but only the human body, with its lived experience of comfort, mobility, and identity, can adjudicate which silhouettes are viable, desirable, or radical in a meaningful way. Human intuition versus algorithmic creativity. Here we arrive at the deeper philosophical question. What is the relationship between human intuition and algorithmic creativity? Humans bring embodiment, cultural memory, emotional nuance. Algorithms bring pattern recognition at scale, combinatorial novelty, and computational speed. The danger lies in assuming one can replace the other. The promise lies in their interplay. Consider jazz improvisation. A musician listens, anticipates, responds, and reconfigures. Similarly, a designer engaged with AI listens to the algorithmic output, discards some, refines others, and introduces new prompts. Creativity becomes dialogical. It is not man versus machine, but designer with machine. Case studies. Let us ground this in real-world examples. Tommy Hilfiger has experimented with AI-driven design labs, generating thousands of denim pattern variations before selecting those with strongest commercial promise. H&M has used AI to analyze purchasing data, consumer preferences, and social imagery to forecast which silhouettes might sell in particular markets. Gucci launched campaigns where AI-generated visuals coexisted with traditional photography, blurring the boundaries between reality and synthesis. Smaller avant-garde labels, such as The Fabricant, a digital-only fashion house, create garments that exist entirely in virtual space, produced through generative systems and marketed as NFTs, or digital collectibles. In each case, the AI is not replacing human creativity, but extending its reach. It accelerates ideation, democratizes experimentation, and provokes new aesthetic questions. Authorship and philosophy. Yet this brings us to the thorny issue of authorship. If an algorithm trained on millions of images generates a new dress design, who is the author? The programmer? The dataset curators? The designer who inputs the prompt? Or is authorship diffused across all of these actors, human and non-human? Philosophically, this challenges our Enlightenment inheritance of the solitary genius. Fashion, always a collective industry involving ateliers, seamstresses, models, photographers, and marketers, now becomes even more distributed in authorship. Perhaps the designer is no longer a solitary originator, but a conductor of algorithmic symphonies, orchestrating prompts, curation, and human judgment into coherent artistic direction. Ethical debates, originality, and plagiarism. But what about originality? AI models are trained on vast corpora of existing designs. If an AI outputs a pattern that resembles a forgotten textile from 1923, is that plagiarism or revival? If it recombines silhouettes that echo an indigenous garment without cultural acknowledgement, is that theft or inspiration? These ethical debates are urgent. Intellectual property law was not designed for non-human creators. Fashion law itself is notoriously murky. Garments often cannot be copyrighted in their entirety, only specific patterns or logos. Thus, AI muddies already complex waters. Some argue that AI democratizes creativity. Anyone with access to a model can design. Others warn of homogenization, as algorithms trained on dominant datasets may replicate mainstream aesthetics and marginalize alternative traditions. Still, others worry about the devaluation of skilled labor as AI-generated design at scale threatens to replace the human craftsmanship that gives fashion its cultural depth. Closing reflections. To conclude, generative AI in fashion should not be understood as a replacement for designers, but as a new interlocutor in the creative process. It is a mirror, a provocateur, a collaborator that extends the human imagination while also challenging our categories of authorship, originality, and ethics. The continuity lies in the enduring human desire to express identity through clothing. The rupture lies in the means. Where once pattern was hand-drawn, now it is co-generated by neural networks. Where once silhouettes were cut from cloth, now they are rendered by algorithms. Where once color forecasting was intuition, now it is data-enhanced prediction. We stand at a threshold. The future of fashion may not be about choosing between human or machine, but about cultivating a symbiosis, a practice in which intuition and computation dance together, producing garments and images that neither could have invented alone. Thank you. Consumer personalization and AI-driven fashion marketing. Let us begin. The story of consumer personalization in fashion marketing is, at its core, the story of how clothing moves from the collective to the intimate, from mass messages to whispers addressed to the individual. To understand how artificial intelligence, and especially generative AI, reshapes this domain, we need to trace both the technological arc and the philosophical implications. This lecture will explore the shift from mass advertising to hyper-personalized campaigns, the use of generative AI to create dynamic ads tailored to consumer psychology, the predictive personalization of e-commerce, the ethical dilemmas of manipulation versus empowerment, the case studies of successful personalization engines, and finally the sociological consequences of algorithmic identity shaping. From mass advertising to hyper-personalization. For most of the 20th century, fashion advertising was a broadcast medium. Designers and retailers bought space in magazines, billboards, or television and projected a singular image to millions of viewers. Think of the iconic Calvin Klein billboards in Times Square or the glossy Dior spreads in Vogue. These campaigns operated under the logic of mass persuasion. Create one narrative, repeat it at scale, and let the consumer find themselves within it. But as digital infrastructures matured, this model began to fray. The internet brought data. Social media brought segmentation. Suddenly, marketers could see not just what millions liked, but what each individual clicked, shared, or purchased. Fashion marketing shifted from the megaphone to the microscope. Instead of speaking to everyone, brands could speak to you. And that shift from mass culture to micro-targeting marks the beginning of hyper-personalization. Generative AI and dynamic consumer-specific ads entered generative AI. If earlier personalization meant showing a slightly different banner to a sneaker enthusiast than to a handbag buyer, today's AI systems create entirely new ad variations on the fly, sculpted to individual psychology. Imagine this. You linger on a website, browsing floral dresses but not purchasing. The AI system notes your browsing time, your geographic location, even the ambient season. It generates a tailored ad. Your perfect spring look, lightweight florals to match your city's upcoming sunny week. The ad imagery is dynamically generated, not a stock photo, but a model resembling your demographic cohort, posed in a style that resonates with your browsing history. The innovation lies in AI's ability to simulate aesthetic empathy. It does not just recommend, it anticipates and co-creates. Where older ads were fixed, generative ads are living artifacts, images, texts, even videos that exist only for you at that moment. Predictive personalization in e-commerce. Now, let us turn to predictive personalization. E-commerce platforms, from Amazon to Zalando to Farfetch, increasingly rely on machine learning to anticipate not just what you want now, but what you will want tomorrow. These systems track not only your purchases, but your pauses, your scrolls, your abandoned carts. They cross-reference with millions of other shoppers. The predictive logic works like this. If 10,000 consumers with browsing patterns similar to yours later purchased a certain sneaker, the system predicts you will likely follow suit. Generative AI intensifies this by designing the path itself. It may generate product descriptions tailored to your reading style, or curate storefronts where the order of products adapts in real time as you scroll. We should note here that personalization is not merely reactive. It becomes preemptive. The system nudges desire before it fully emerges, positioning items in your perceptual field at the very moment you are most susceptible. Ethical concerns. Manipulation versus empowerment. This brings us to the ethical tension. On one hand, personalization empowers. It saves time, reduces noise, and makes fashion feel more relevant. Consumers no longer wade through irrelevant catalogs. Instead, they experience a sense of curation, almost as if they have a personal stylist. On the other hand, personalization risks manipulation. When ads are tailored to psychological vulnerabilities, say, targeting insecurity, loneliness, or impulsivity, the line between relevance and exploitation blurs. If AI detects that you browse late at night and are more impulsive then, should it strategically present high-priced luxury goods at that hour? If the system knows your mood through wearable sensors or browsing patterns, is it ethical to use that data to incite purchase? The question becomes, is personalization serving the consumer's goals, or is it redirecting the consumer toward the system's profit goals? Empowerment and manipulation are not opposites here. They are often entwined, oscillating in the same digital gesture. Case studies. Successful personalization engines. Let us anchor this in examples. Stitch Fix has famously combined algorithms with human stylists. The system predicts what items will resonate, while humans add the finishing curation. The result is personalization at scale, with a human touch layered atop machine intelligence. Nike's personalized apps use browsing and workout data to recommend shoes and apparel, generating a feeling that the brand knows you. Farfetch uses AI to curate luxury shopping feeds, tailoring the order and prominence of products to each shopper's patterns. Spotify-style recommendation logics are even entering fashion. Some startups now offer fashion playlists, dynamically generated collections updated weekly, based on your evolving aesthetic profile. In each case, the success is not simply technical accuracy, but the illusion of intimacy. Consumers feel seen. The algorithm becomes a silent stylist. Sociological implications. Algorithmic consumer identity. Finally, let us consider the sociological implications. When personalization becomes pervasive, identity itself risks becoming algorithmically shaped. Think about it. If your daily exposure to fashion is mediated by predictive algorithms, your sense of style may no longer emerge purely from your autonomous taste. Instead, your identity is co-authored by systems that anticipate and guide your choices. What you think of as your personal style may in fact be a statistical echo of similar consumers. This is not unprecedented. Culture has always been shaped by media industries, but the difference lies in granularity and feedback speed. Mass advertising in the 1950s influenced consumers at the population level. AI-driven personalization in the 2020s influences you individually, continuously, adjusting in milliseconds. Identity becomes fluid, responsive, and datafied. Sociologist Shoshana Zuboff calls this behavioral surplus, the capture of human patterns not just to reflect behavior, but to predict and shape it. In fashion, this means your style may be less about self-expression and more about system-optimized engagement. And that is a profound shift in how we understand autonomy, authenticity, and consumer freedom. Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? Personalization, amplified by generative AI, marks both a continuation and a rupture. It continues the long-standing tradition of fashion as personal expression, yet it ruptures the method by which that expression is cultivated, no longer primarily through culture and community, but through algorithmic orchestration. The stakes are clear. On the optimistic side, personalization could democratize access to style, empower consumers to find what truly resonates, and reduce waste by matching production to demand. On the pessimistic side, personalization could entrench manipulation, exacerbate overconsumption, and reduce individuality to algorithmic patterns. What is certain is that fashion marketing will never again be purely mass, nor purely personal. It will be algorithmically hybrid, co-created by human desire and machine prediction. The question we must ask is not whether personalization will define the future, it already does, but what kind of future we want it to define. Generative AI in fashion branding and storytelling. Let us begin. When we speak of generative artificial intelligence in the fashion industry, we are not simply talking about a tool that designs clothes faster or produces content more cheaply. We are talking about a technology that reshapes narratives, the very stories through which brands exist in culture. In today's lecture, I want to take you on a journey across the terrain of branding and storytelling in the age of AI. We will move through four major themes. First, how AI generates brand narratives across social media, video, and immersive environments. Second, the semiotic shifts that occur when machines craft symbolic meaning. Third, the tension between heritage branding and AI-driven reinvention. And fourth, the risks of homogenization in brand voices. Along the way, I will weave insights from semiotics, cultural studies, and digital marketing to show you why this moment is both exhilarating and precarious. Part 1. AI as generator of brand narratives. Branding is not simply a logo, not simply a tagline, but an ongoing narrative performance. Every post, every campaign, every runway show is a chapter in that story. Traditionally, these narratives have been authored by human copywriters, creative directors, and advertising agencies. Generative AI alters this ecology by producing stories that are algorithmically crafted, infinitely scalable, and contextually adaptive. Consider social media. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok thrive on speed and volume. Brands are expected to post multiple times per day, each post tailored to the mood of the moment. AI now allows for dynamic content generation, captions that shift tone depending on trending hashtags, visuals that morph to echo the color palettes of viral images, videos stitched together from past archives but remixed to feel contemporary. A campaign no longer needs weeks of lead time. It can be produced in hours, even minutes, constantly tuned to the algorithmic currents of the feed. Now extend this to video. Generative AI tools for video production, whether short-form clips or cinematic advertisements, enable brands to test multiple narrative arcs simultaneously. One consumer may encounter a 30-second ad portraying the brand as rebellious. Another sees the same product framed in aspirational luxury. This is narrative segmentation at scale, where the story itself fragments and reconfigures based on consumer profiles. The brand ceases to be a single story told to all and becomes instead a kaleidoscope of micro-stories told to each. Finally, there is the frontier of immersive environments, virtual showrooms, augmented reality experiences, and metaverse spaces. Here, AI does not just generate images or text, but entire worlds. Imagine walking into a virtual flagship store where the architecture morphs in real time depending on your preferences, your history, even your biometric responses. The narrative is no longer linear but spatial, not simply told, but inhabited. AI is the silent stage designer, scripting environments that feel personal, alive, and endlessly adaptive. Part 2. Semiotic shifts in machine-made meaning. Now let us turn to the question of meaning. Branding is fundamentally semiotic work. A logo is a signifier, a campaign image a symbol. To advertise a dress as romantic or edgy is to manipulate cultural codes that link fabrics and cuts to broader social imaginaries. When humans craft meaning, there is always an intentional subjectivity. A creative director infuses her worldview, a photographer captures a mood, a copywriter chooses metaphors. But what happens when a machine generates symbolic meaning? AI operates through pattern recognition. It has no lived memory of romance, rebellion, or heritage. It learns these associations statistically by digesting millions of prior images and texts. When it produces a narrative, say, a campaign positioning a handbag as a symbol of empowerment, it does so by stitching together statistical echoes of past empowerment tropes. The semiotic shift is profound. Meaning becomes less the expression of a singular vision and more the recombination of cultural residue. This raises questions from semiotics and cultural studies. Roland Barthes taught us to read advertising as mythology, where a product is invested with meanings that transcend its utility. With AI, the myth-making becomes automated. The myth of empowerment or sustainability or luxury can be generated endlessly, customized for each consumer, and delivered without pause. The danger, however, is that myths lose their depth of cultural anchoring. They become surface simulations, plausible but hollow, convincing yet generic. Yet there is also opportunity. Machines may detect latent semiotic patterns invisible to human marketers, unexpected connections between color, emotion, and cultural moment. Just as surrealists drew upon dreams to disrupt rational meaning, AI may surface associations that feel strange but resonant. Thus, machine-made meaning is neither inherently impoverished nor inherently liberating. It is a new regime of semiosis, one we are only beginning to theorize. Part 3. Heritage and Reinvention. Fashion thrives on heritage. Brands like Chanel, Hermès, or Dior ground their value not just in products but in decades, sometimes centuries, of carefully curated narratives. Heritage branding is about continuity, the ability to signal timelessness amidst trend cycles. Generative AI introduces attention, the drive to reinvent constantly versus the need to protect historical coherence. Imagine training an AI on decades of Chanel imagery. The system could generate new campaigns that look like Chanel, feel like Chanel, even quote the semiotics of Coco Chanel herself. But is this innovation or mimicry? Is it heritage extended or heritage diluted? Some brands are experimenting cautiously. Gucci, for example, has blended archival motifs with AI-generated remixing in digital campaigns. They present it not as a replacement of heritage, but as a dialogue between past and future. AI becomes a co-curator, recombining archival codes into contemporary expressions. The deeper philosophical question is this: can a machine honor tradition? Or does algorithmic remix inherently flatten the historical weight of heritage into a style filter? Cultural studies would remind us that heritage is not just visual continuity. It is embedded in rituals, in craftsmanship, in collective memory. AI can simulate the look of heritage, but can it carry the gravity of lineage? The answer, I suspect, lies in hybridization. Brands that succeed will not outsource heritage to AI, but will use AI to stage new encounters with heritage, juxtapositions that reveal continuity precisely by staging rupture. For instance, an immersive AI-generated exhibition that allows consumers to walk through a century of Dior silhouettes, with each gown morphing into new speculative forms. Here, AI does not erase history. It animates it, makes it tactile and alive. Part 4. Risks of homogenization. Finally, let us confront the risks. When many brands use similar AI systems trained on overlapping datasets, there is a real danger of homogenization. Already one can detect the AI aesthetic, sleek, glossy, futuristic, with certain recurring tropes. If all brands lean into these same generative logics, the diversity of brand voices may collapse into a narrow bandwidth of algorithmic sameness. This is not unprecedented. The advertising industry has long been accused of producing formulaic campaigns. But AI accelerates the risk because its outputs are driven by statistical averages. Unless carefully directed, AI tends toward convergence rather than divergence. The irony is sharp. A technology celebrated for infinite creativity may produce an era of monotony. From a digital marketing perspective, homogenization undermines differentiation. If Gucci and Balenciaga and Zara all deploy similar AI-driven brand voices, how does a consumer distinguish one from another? From a cultural studies perspective, homogenization risks reducing fashion's role as a site of cultural experimentation, flattening its radical possibilities into algorithmic cliches. And from a semiotic perspective, homogenization erodes the symbolic richness of fashion, the play of signs, the contest of meanings, the subversive reappropriations, all risk being drowned in a sea of AI-generated repetition. The solution, then, is not to reject AI, but to discipline it creatively. Brands must cultivate what I call algorithmic distinctiveness, training models on unique archives, imposing strong artistic direction, and curating outputs with human discernment. Only then can AI become a force for diversification rather than convergence. Cross-disciplinary reflections. Before concluding, let me highlight how different disciplines illuminate this moment. Semiotics shows us that AI shifts the locus of meaning from intentional authorship to statistical recombination. The question becomes, how do we read machine-made myths? Cultural studies reminds us that branding is never just about products. It is about power, identity, and the circulation of cultural codes. AI reconfigures those dynamics by automating cultural production at scale. Digital marketing provides the pragmatic lens, showing how AI enables segmentation, dynamic storytelling, and immersive experiences. Yet it also warns of diminishing returns when differentiation is lost. Together, these perspectives reveal that AI in fashion branding is not merely a technical upgrade, it is a cultural inflection point. Closing thoughts. To conclude, generative AI is not simply another marketing tool. It is a new storyteller, one that crafts narratives across platforms, across media, across identities. It alters the very semiotic fabric of branding, challenging notions of heritage, amplifying risks of homogenization, and demanding new forms of curation and direction. The future of fashion branding will belong not to those who blindly automate, but to those who orchestrate, who recognize AI as a collaborator, who curate its outputs, who embed machine-made meaning into deeper cultural contexts. AI may generate infinite stories, but only humans can ensure those stories matter, resonate, and differentiate. We stand, then, not at the end of storytelling, but at its reinvention. The fashion brand of tomorrow will not be a static myth repeated endlessly. It will be a dynamic narrative co-created by humans and machines, performed across platforms, and contested in culture. Whether this leads to richness or homogenization depends not on the algorithms themselves, but on the wisdom with which we guide them. Predictive analytics and AI-generated trend. Forecasting in fashion marketing. Let us begin. The fashion industry has always been an arena where prediction meets performance. Designers, marketers, and cultural intermediaries have built entire careers on anticipating what consumers will desire next season, next year, or even in the next decade. Trend forecasting is not just a technical exercise, it is the lifeblood of fashion commerce. Today, however, predictive analytics and generative artificial intelligence radically transform this space. We are moving from intuition and cultural reading toward big data-driven prediction, generative simulation of possible future collections, and the integration of global social media signals into algorithmic models. In this lecture, I want to explore these shifts in depth. We will begin with the mechanics of big data-driven style prediction. We will then move to the role of generative AI in simulating future collections. We will consider the integration of social media signals at global scale. Along the way, we will discuss accuracy challenges, ethical dilemmas such as cultural appropriation, and the competitive advantage these systems create for fast-moving brands. Finally, we will compare the legacy model of traditional trend bureaus with the emerging landscape of algorithmic forecasting. Part 1. Big data-driven style prediction. At its core, predictive analytics in fashion marketing is about recognizing patterns in consumption and culture. In the past, a trend forecaster might travel to Paris, attend runway shows, walk through Tokyo's Harajuku district, or visit streetwear hubs in Los Angeles. These embodied encounters with style became the data from which intuition was drawn. Today, predictive analytics operates on a far larger, more granular canvas. Big data systems ingest billions of data points, e-commerce transactions, social media imagery, Google search queries, resale platform trends, influencer mentions, even satellite imagery of urban spaces. Algorithms parse this data to detect shifts in preference before they are visible to the naked eye. For example, a subtle uptick in searches for lime green handbag across multiple regions might be detected weeks before consumers themselves articulate it as a trend. Predictive models rely on a combination of time series analysis, clustering algorithms, and natural language processing. They not only track what is being purchased, but also what is being discussed, tagged, or imagined. This enables brands to move from reactive to preemptive strategies, designing products for desires that are not yet fully crystallized but statistically probable. The key here is scale. No individual trend scout, no matter how skilled, can analyze millions of TikTok videos per hour or parse shifting hashtags across multiple languages in real time. Predictive analytics does exactly that, making style prediction an increasingly computational enterprise. Part 2. Generative AI and simulated collections. If predictive analytics tells us what consumers might want, generative AI allows us to visualize those possibilities. Here is where the story becomes not just quantitative, but creative. Imagine a system trained on decades of runway imagery, fabric textures, silhouette databases, and street photography. Given predictive signals, say, a rise in interest in neo-Gothic minimalism, the AI can generate simulated collections that embody this emerging trend. Designers and marketers can preview hundreds of possible futures. How will this motif look in evening wear, in sportswear, in accessories? Which combinations feel novel yet plausible? This is the simulation of style futures. The AI does not simply extrapolate. It generates visual prototypes that can be evaluated, curated, and refined. In some cases, AI can even propose entirely new silhouettes that merge historically distant references, for example, combining Victorian corsetry with postmodern streetwear proportions. The effect is to accelerate the design cycle. What once required months of sketching, sampling, and mood boarding can now happen in days, even hours. This does not eliminate human creativity. Rather, it provides a vast field of possibilities from which human designers select and inflect. Generative AI thus acts as both mirror and muse, reflecting the statistical tendencies of data while provoking unexpected aesthetic hybrids. Part 3. Integration with global social media signals. The contemporary fashion system is inseparable from social media. Instagram, TikTok, and Weibo are not just platforms of distribution, they are laboratories of style creation. Predictive systems now scrape these platforms continuously, detecting not only hashtags but also the visual signals embedded in user-generated content. Computer vision algorithms analyze the cut of jeans in uploaded selfies, the color palettes in influencer reels, the layering techniques in street photography. These are mapped against demographic and geographic metadata, creating a real-time atlas of global fashion microtrends. The integration of these signals means that forecasting is no longer about a handful of fashion capitals. A nail art style emerging in Lagos, a thrift remix aesthetic in Sao Paulo, or a gender-fluid silhouette popular among Seoul youth can be captured, analyzed, and scaled globally within weeks. This is both democratizing and destabilizing. It democratizes because voices from outside traditional centers can now be detected and amplified. But it destabilizes because trends can spread at such velocity that trend fatigue sets in almost as quickly as enthusiasm rises. For marketers, this means forecasting must be not just predictive, but also adaptive, constantly recalibrating as signals evolve. Part 4. Accuracy challenges. Yet for all their promise, predictive systems face serious accuracy challenges. First, data noise. Social media trends can be deceptive. A color that dominates Instagram filters may not translate into actual purchases. Algorithmic models must distinguish between performative style online and embodied consumption offline. Second, overfitting. When systems are trained on past data, they may replicate historical biases rather than anticipate true novelty. For example, if most prior sneaker trends were driven by male youth markets, the algorithm may underpredict emergent demand in women's footwear or non-binary aesthetics. Third, temporal volatility. Trends may spike and collapse with unprecedented speed. A microtrend can dominate TikTok for 3 weeks and vanish. Predictive analytics may accurately detect the rise but fail to anticipate the collapse, leaving brands with overstocked inventory. Finally, contextual interpretation. A color popular in one cultural context may carry entirely different connotations in another. Predictive models struggle with these cultural nuances, leading to misinterpretations when global scaling is attempted. Part 5. Risks of cultural appropriation. Here we must pause to address an ethical concern. Cultural appropriation. Predictive systems trained on global social media inevitably capture styles rooted in specific cultural traditions. Without careful curation, these can be extracted, commodified, and represented by global brands without acknowledgement of origin. For example, an algorithm may detect rising interest in indigenous beadwork patterns or West African prints. If these are then simulated by generative AI and incorporated into collections without attribution, the result is algorithmic appropriation, stripping cultural forms of context and exploiting them as mere trend data. The irony is stark. Technologies meant to democratize fashion visibility may, if unregulated, amplify historical patterns of extraction. Ethical use of predictive analytics therefore requires cultural stewardship, ensuring that communities of origin are credited, compensated, and represented. Otherwise, predictive systems risk becoming engines of exploitation under the guise of innovation. Part 6. Competitive advantage for fast-moving brands. Despite these risks, predictive analytics and generative forecasting offer undeniable competitive advantages, especially for fast-moving brands. Companies like Zara or Shein thrive on speed to market. Their business model is predicated on detecting a trend, producing garments, and delivering them to consumers in weeks rather than months. Algorithmic forecasting supercharges this model by compressing the lag between trend emergence and product release. For luxury brands, the advantage is slightly different. Here, predictive systems allow for risk mitigation, testing which archival motifs or experimental silhouettes are likely to resonate before committing to large-scale production. The result is a more precise alignment between heritage and market appetite. In both cases, the capacity to anticipate rather than react becomes a strategic differentiator. The brand that can predict with 70% accuracy what consumers will want next quarter has an immense edge over those who wait for signals to solidify. Part 7. Comparing traditional trend bureaus with algorithmic forecasting. Finally, let us compare the old guard with the new. Traditional trend bureaus like WGSN or Pantone's Color Institute have long served as the arbiters of taste prediction. Their forecasts were produced through a mix of cultural research, expert intuition, and curated narrative. These bureaus offered stability, authority, and a sense of continuity. Their pronouncements shaped entire industries, from fashion to interiors to consumer electronics. But their cycle was seasonal, even annual. Reports were issued months in advance, and brands structured their calendars around these predictions. Algorithmic forecasting operates on a different temporal logic. It is real-time, continuous, adaptive. It does not produce a single definitive report, but a constantly updating stream of probabilistic forecasts. Where trend bureaus relied on human interpretation, algorithmic forecasting relies on data correlation. The strengths of the old model were coherence and narrative authority. The strengths of the new model are granularity and velocity. The challenge for the industry is to integrate these, retaining the cultural depth of human interpretation while embracing the precision of computational forecasting. Perhaps the most effective future lies in hybrid models, where traditional forecasters use AI as an augmentative tool. Human experts provide cultural context, ethical oversight, and semiotic depth. AI provides data scale, simulation, and speed. Together, they can produce forecasts that are both accurate and meaningful. Closing reflections. To conclude, predictive analytics and AI-generated trend forecasting mark a profound transformation in fashion marketing. We are shifting from intuition-based prophecy to data-driven probability, from static seasonal forecasts to continuous adaptive prediction. Big data enables style prediction at unprecedented scale. Generative AI simulates futures that were once unimaginable. Social media integration ensures that global signals are captured in real time. And yet, accuracy remains fragile, cultural risks remain high, and the specter of homogenization looms. The competitive advantage is clear. Brands that harness these systems responsibly will move faster, adapt more precisely, and resonate more deeply with consumers. But the cultural stakes are equally clear. Without ethical stewardship, these systems risk reproducing exploitation and erasing the richness of cultural specificity. Fashion, after all, is not just about prediction. It is about meaning, identity, and belonging. Predictive analytics must therefore be not only technically sophisticated but also culturally sensitive. Only then can AI-driven forecasting truly serve as a tool of empowerment rather than appropriation. Fashion, at its very heart, has always been about performance. The runway, more than any other space, crystallizes this. It is the theater where fabric becomes fantasy, where commerce and culture collide, where brands stage their identity not just through clothes, but through spectacle. To understand virtual fashion shows and AI-generated runways, we must first trace the historical significance of the runway spectacle, then move through its digital transformation, and finally examine the rise of AI-generated models, garments, and immersive consumer experiences. Along the way, we must grapple with questions of inclusivity, sustainability, and the critique of spectacle in what Jean Baudrillard might call a hyper-real economy. Part 1. The historical significance of the runway. Runways as we know them emerged in the early 20th century. Charles Frederick Worth, often called the father of haute couture, began staging private fashion presentations for clients in Paris. By the mid-1900s, these evolved into formalized shows, structured sequences of models walking in choreographed order, presenting garments for elite audiences. The runway was never just about clothes. It was about ritual. The lights dim, the music rises, the models emerge. It is a rite of initiation into the season's aesthetic. Designers from Christian Dior to Alexander McQueen understood this. McQueen, in particular, elevated the runway into a form of performance art, staging robotic spray painting of dresses, holographic projections of Kate Moss, and theatrical narratives that blurred fashion, theater, and cinema. Runways became the myth-making engines of fashion. They generated images and symbols that trickled down into magazines, department stores, and eventually street style. To attend Paris or Milan Fashion Week was to witness the birth of cultural capital. For decades, these spectacles were exclusive, accessible only to editors, buyers, and celebrities. The runway was the temple. The public only glimpsed its images later. Part 2. Transition to digital showcases. By the early 2000s, the exclusivity of the runway began to fracture. First, the internet made Fashion Week photos instantly available. Then live streaming brought shows to global audiences. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 accelerated this trend dramatically. With physical gatherings restricted, brands pivoted to digital showcases, runway videos, 3D lookbooks, augmented reality presentations. What had once been a closed ritual became global content. Millions could tune in simultaneously, often for free. Brands such as Balmain, Burberry, and Hanifa experimented with 3D and digital-first shows. Hanifa's 2020 showcase was especially significant. Using 3D rendered garments on invisible models, it demonstrated that digital presentation could be powerful, inclusive, and technologically daring. This transition did not erase the runway's theatricality. Instead, it migrated spectacle into digital formats. Instagram posts, YouTube streams, TikTok snippets. The runway ceased to be an event in a room and became a media object distributed across platforms. The logic of fashion shifted from exclusivity to virality. Part 3. AI-generated models and garments. Here enters generative AI. If digital showcases allowed for 3D rendering, AI goes further, producing entirely synthetic models and garments that need never exist in physical form. AI-generated models, such as Shudu Graham or Lil Miquela, already blur the line between influencer and fiction. These avatars appear in campaigns, walk virtual runways, and attract millions of followers. For brands, they offer control, no scheduling conflicts, no human imperfection, infinitely malleable aesthetics. AI-generated garments extend this logic. Systems trained on historical fashion archives and trend data can propose novel designs, simulate draping and texture, and render them photorealistically. An AI runway can be staged without fabric, without labor, without human models. Entire collections can be prototyped and presented digitally, then selected for physical production only if demand warrants. This is not simply efficiency, it is a reconfiguration of the ontological status of fashion. A garment can exist as image first, object second. The virtual precedes the real. Part 4. Immersive consumer experiences. Virtual runways also open the door to immersive consumer participation. Instead of sitting passively, viewers may enter virtual environments, exploring runways through VR headsets, customizing avatars to wear garments in real time, or purchasing digital clothing for platforms like Roblox or Fortnite. Immersive showcases collapse the gap between showing and shopping. A consumer might see a jacket on a digital runway, try it instantly on their avatar, and purchase both the digital and physical versions simultaneously. The runway becomes not only a site of spectacle but also of transaction. In some cases, consumers themselves may co-create the spectacle. AI systems can allow input prompts. Viewers suggest moods, colors, or themes, and the runway adapts dynamically. This is fashion as interactive narrative, blurring the line between audience and author. Part 5. Inclusivity and democratization. One of the strongest promises of AI-generated runways is inclusivity. Traditional fashion shows often reproduced narrow ideals of beauty, thin, tall, Eurocentric models. AI, in theory, can diversify representation, generating models of all body types, ethnicities, ages, and abilities. Yet this promise is double-edged. Diversity in AI is not authenticity unless carefully designed. If datasets are biased, the outputs replicate those biases. True inclusivity requires conscious curation, ethical frameworks, and cultural sensitivity. Otherwise, virtual runways risk becoming simulations of diversity without structural change. Nevertheless, the possibility is real. Virtual showcases can include models previously excluded due to geography, disability, or socioeconomic barriers. A teenager in Nairobi or Manila could design and present collections on AI platforms, bypassing the gatekeeping of Paris or Milan. This democratization destabilizes hierarchies and redefines who gets to speak in fashion. Part 6. Sustainability benefits. The fashion industry is notorious for its environmental impact: fabric waste, carbon-heavy travel, unsold inventory. Virtual runways offer sustainability benefits. First, they reduce the need for physical travel. Thousands of editors, buyers, and influencers flying to fashion weeks generate immense carbon emissions. Virtual showcases eliminate much of this. Second, digital garments reduce sampling waste. Designers can iterate virtually before producing physical prototypes. Third, AI forecasting and virtual presentations enable on-demand production. Garments are manufactured only after consumer interest is confirmed, reducing overproduction. These benefits align with broader consumer demands for ethical, sustainable practices. Virtual runways can therefore be framed not only as innovation, but as responsibility. Part 7. Critique of spectacle in the hyper-real economy. And yet, we must step back and critique. Fashion has always been about spectacle. But when runways become entirely virtual, the spectacle risks tipping into hyper-reality. Baudrillard warned us that in the hyper-real, signs refer not to reality, but only to other signs. An AI-generated garment that never exists physically, modeled by a synthetic avatar in a simulated runway, is fashion detached from fabric. It is pure sign, pure image. Does this liberate fashion from material constraints, or does it hollow it into content without substance? Are we enriching fashion's symbolic capacity, or are we diluting it into endless, frictionless simulation? Moreover, virtual spectacle risks homogenization. If many brands rely on similar AI systems, outputs may converge into glossy, algorithmically polished aesthetics. The uniqueness of a McQueen show, the visceral unpredictability, may give way to a flood of beautiful but formulaic AI spectacles. The hyperreal economy also commodifies attention. Virtual runways are designed for clicks, shares, engagement metrics. The danger is that fashion loses its anchoring in craft and culture, becoming a content stream competing with memes and music videos. Part 8. Cross-disciplinary insights. From cultural studies, we learn that fashion runways are not just marketing. They are cultural texts, staging power, identity, and ideology. From semiotics, we see that AI-generated runways produce new sign systems, where garments are not material, but symbolic constructs. From digital marketing, we recognize the strategic advantage: global reach, interactivity, and cost efficiency. These lenses together reveal both promise and peril. Virtual fashion shows are not trivial novelties. They are reconfigurations of fashion as medium, message, and market. Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? Virtual fashion shows and AI-generated runways mark a profound shift. They extend the history of runway spectacle into digital and hyper-real domains. They promise inclusivity and sustainability while enabling immersive consumer experiences. Yet they also raise ethical questions, risk homogenization, and amplify the critique of spectacle in an economy where images circulate faster than meaning. The challenge for the future is not whether virtual runways will persist. They will, but how we shape them. Will they democratize fashion, or merely reproduce its exclusions digitally? Will they reduce waste, or generate new forms of overconsumption in the digital realm? Will they enrich culture or dissolve it into endless simulations? Fashion, like society, is at a threshold. The runway remains the stage, but the stage itself has shifted, from fabric and lights to pixels and code. The question is whether we, as creators, consumers, and critics, can ensure that the stories told on these new runways are not only spectacular, but also meaningful, ethical, and transformative. AI-driven influencer marketing in fashion. Let us begin. The fashion industry thrives not simply on fabric and cut, but on visibility and persuasion. For decades, the machinery of fashion marketing has sought to capture attention and translate desire into consumption. In recent years, however, one particular form of persuasion has dominated: influencer marketing. Unlike the one-to-many advertising of the 20th century, influencer marketing is premised on parasocial intimacy. Consumers trust influencers because they appear authentic, relatable, and embedded in everyday life. Now, with the advent of generative artificial intelligence, even this model is being reimagined. AI-driven influencer marketing encompasses three key domains. First, the rise of virtual influencers generated by AI. Second, the algorithmic matching of influencers to campaigns. And third, the use of predictive modeling to anticipate audience engagement. Yet this transformation also brings new challenges: crises of authenticity, questions of consumer trust, and the emergence of hybrid identities where humans and AI co-create or even coexist within the same persona. Let us move carefully through these layers. Part 1. Virtual influencers generated by AI. The first domain is perhaps the most visible: the rise of AI-generated influencers. These are digital characters, sometimes photorealistic, sometimes stylized, that inhabit Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms as if they were human. Consider Lil Miquela, launched in 2016 by the startup Brood. She is a 19-year-old Brazilian-American virtual model, complete with backstory, fashion sense, and interpersonal dramas. She collaborates with luxury brands, releases music, and engages in activism campaigns. Or take Shudu Graham, created by photographer Cameron James Wilson, marketed as the world's first digital supermodel. These figures blur the line between avatar and influencer, commanding millions of followers and lucrative brand partnerships. The advantage for brands is clear. Virtual influencers are controllable, tireless, and endlessly malleable. They do not demand fees in the traditional sense. They never age or change their personal style without design, and they are free of scandals unless scripted. A brand can design a character whose identity aligns perfectly with its aesthetic: a futuristic streetwear muse, a retro Parisian figure, or a pan-global digital ambassador. Generative AI deepens this by automating the process. No longer do teams need to hand-render every image. Models like DALL-E, Midjourney, or Stable Diffusion can generate endless content featuring the influencer in new outfits, poses, and environments. Entire campaigns can be created in days rather than months. But here emerges the first tension. Consumers value influencers for their authenticity, their perceived reality. When the influencer is fictional, what happens to this bond? Some followers embrace the novelty, others feel deceived. Thus, the virtual influencer both extends and undermines the influencer model. Part 2. Algorithmic matching of influencers to campaigns. Beyond the creation of influencers themselves lies another layer of AI: the algorithmic matching of influencers to brand campaigns. In the early days, brands selected influencers manually, based on follower counts or aesthetic alignment. Today, platforms employ machine learning algorithms to analyze vast datasets of influencers: engagement metrics, audience demographics, geographic distribution, sentiment analysis of comments, even psychographic clustering. AI systems then recommend which influencer, whether human or virtual, is best suited to a given campaign objective. This process transforms influencer selection from an art into a science of precision targeting. For example, if a brand launches sustainable athleisure wear aimed at Gen Z women in Southeast Asia, algorithms can identify micro-influencers in Manila or Jakarta whose followers are statistically aligned. This reduces wasted spending and maximizes return on investment. Moreover, the matching is dynamic. Campaigns can adapt midstream. If early engagement rates falter, AI systems suggest pivoting to different influencers or adjusting the creative. Influencer marketing becomes real-time optimization rather than static placement. The risk, of course, is reductionism. Algorithms may privilege influencers who fit neat categories, sidelining voices that are harder to quantify, those who bring cultural depth or subcultural authenticity. The danger is a narrowing of diversity, as the optimal influencers all begin to look the same. Part 3. Predictive modeling of audience engagement. The third domain is predictive modeling. Beyond selecting influencers, AI systems aim to forecast audience behavior. Engagement is not random. It is shaped by variables such as content format, posting time, tone of voice, and cultural resonance. AI models trained on historical campaign data can predict how a given influencer's audience will respond to specific content. For instance, predictive systems might determine that a digital influencer's audience is 35% more likely to engage with carousel posts than videos, or that emotional storytelling outperforms product-centric messaging in certain demographics. Some platforms even simulate how mimetic spread may unfold, anticipating not just likes and shares but secondary cultural uptake across unrelated communities. The implications are immense. Marketing teams can pre-test campaigns virtually, iterating until predictive models suggest optimal performance. Content creation becomes simulation first. Ads are not merely launched into the void. They are forecast, optimized, and only then deployed. Yet predictive modeling carries risks. Over-reliance may lead to creative stagnation. If models suggest sticking to safe formulas, campaigns may lack daring innovation. Worse, predictive models are trained on past behaviors, potentially reinforcing biases or excluding emergent cultural currents not yet visible in data. Part 4. Authenticity crises and consumer trust. At the heart of influencer marketing lies trust. Consumers follow influencers because they perceive them as authentic. When AI intervenes, this trust becomes fragile. Virtual influencers, by definition, cannot disclose genuine experiences. They do not eat the food they recommend or wear the clothes they endorse. Their life is scripted. As consumers become more aware of this, skepticism grows. Even human influencers face suspicion when their posts are heavily algorithmically optimized or when brand alignment seems manufactured rather than organic. The crisis of authenticity extends further. If AI systems write captions, generate photos, and even simulate comments, what remains of the influencer's voice? Followers may begin to feel that they are engaging not with a person, but with a marketing machine disguised as intimacy. And yet, paradoxically, some audiences embrace this unreality. For them, the influencer is always a mediated figure, human or not. In this sense, virtual influencers simply make visible what was already true. The influencer is a construct, a performance of authenticity rather than authenticity itself. Part 5. Hybrid identities. Human and AI collaboration between human influencers and purely virtual ones lies a fascinating frontier. Hybrid identities. Here, human influencers collaborate with AI systems to co-create content. An influencer may use generative AI to visualize outfits they cannot access physically, or to extend their presence into languages and cultures they do not personally inhabit. Some experiments even involve influencers sharing their likeness with AI, allowing the algorithm to generate content in their voice when they are unavailable. This creates layered identities, part human, part algorithm. Followers may engage with both, the real influencers' behind-the-scenes moments and the AI-generated extensions that amplify scale and creativity. Hybrid identities also extend to brand ambassadors. Imagine a campaign where a celebrity appears alongside their AI twin, blurring the line between human presence and synthetic replication. Such collaborations raise profound questions. Is the AI twin merely a tool, or does it become a parallel persona? Who controls its voice, its values, its future? The hybrid influencer may become the dominant model, anchored in human relatability, but scaled by AI's generative and predictive capacities. Part 6. Inclusivity, diversity, and risks of bias. Driven influencer marketing also raises issues of inclusivity. On the one hand, virtual influencers can represent diverse body types, ethnicities, and abilities often marginalized in traditional fashion marketing. Algorithms can detect underrepresented markets and direct campaigns toward them. On the other hand, the datasets powering these systems are often biased, dominated by Western Eurocentric aesthetics. If uncorrected, this leads to homogenization rather than diversification. Virtual influencers may reproduce stereotypes rather than disrupt them. Inclusivity must therefore be an intentional design choice. Otherwise, AI risks amplifying inequality under the guise of innovation. Part 7. Toward a hyperreal marketplace. Stepping back, what do we see? AI-driven influencer marketing accelerates a broader cultural shift toward hyperreality. Here, signs and simulations dominate over lived experiences. The influencer's life, already a curated performance, becomes algorithmically generated. Consumers engage not with reality, but with a web of simulations. AI-generated photos, predictive captions, synthetic authenticity. This raises both opportunities and critiques. On one hand, hyperreality allows for imaginative experimentation. Brands and influencers can play with identity, aesthetics, and narrative unconstrained by material limits. On the other hand, it risks hollowing out trust and reducing marketing to endless surfaces without depth. Fashion, more than any industry, thrives in this tension. It has always been about image, performance, and identity. The question is whether AI-driven influencer marketing will enrich this legacy or erode its cultural credibility. Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? AI-driven influencer marketing in fashion is a field of paradoxes. Virtual influencers promise precision and control but provoke authenticity crises. Algorithmic matching improves efficiency but risks narrowing diversity. Predictive modeling enhances engagement forecasting but may stifle creativity. Hybrid identities offer exciting collaborations but raise new questions of authorship and control. At the center remains the consumer, navigating trust in a landscape where the boundary between human and machine blurs. Perhaps the lesson is this: authenticity itself must be redefined, not as pure human expression, but as transparency and mediation, an acknowledgement that all influencers, human or AI, are performances within systems of visibility and desire. Fashion will always seek influence, but in the age of AI, influence is no longer bound to flesh and fabric. It is co-authored by algorithms, simulations, and predictive logics. The future of influencer marketing will be determined not by whether AI participates, it already does, but by how we, as an industry and as a culture, negotiate the ethics, aesthetics, and trust of this new terrain. Generative AI in fashion retail environments. When we talk about fashion retail, we are not merely talking about spaces where clothing is sold. We are talking about theaters of consumption, arenas where identity, aspiration, and commerce intersect. The store has never been neutral. From the Parisian arcades of the 19th century to the flagship boutiques of Fifth Avenue, retail spaces have functioned as symbolic stages where the drama of desire is performed. Today, with the rise of generative artificial intelligence, these stages are undergoing a profound transformation. In this lecture, I will explore 4 dimensions of this transformation. First, the emergence of AI-generated store layouts. Second, the integration of immersive augmented reality try-on experiences. Third, the role of algorithmic curation in shaping product displays. And finally, I will discuss the broader implications, the psychological impact on consumer journeys, the issue of labor displacement, and the symbolic shift of the store as theater in an AI-driven economy. Part 1. AI-generated store layouts. Let us begin with architecture and layout. Retail design has always been a matter of choreography, guiding consumers through spaces, curating sightlines, and staging encounters with products. Traditionally, this work has been handled by visual merchandisers and architects, drawing on intuition and experience. Generative AI now brings a new logic to this process. Imagine a system trained on thousands of successful retail layouts, consumer movement data, and psychological studies of attention. Given parameters, a target demographic, a product line, a desired mood, the AI can generate dozens of potential store blueprints. These are not static sketches, but fully immersive simulations, complete with lighting, soundscapes, and predicted traffic flows. In such a system, shelving height is not arbitrary. It is optimized through predictive modeling of eye-tracking data. Pathways are generated to maximize serendipitous discovery while reducing congestion. Entire layouts can shift seasonally, even daily, as algorithms redesign the space overnight through modular fixtures and digital signage. The result is a retail environment that is not simply designed but continuously generated, a living algorithmic organism that adapts in real time to consumer behavior. Part 2. Immersive AR try-on experiences. The second dimension is the integration of augmented reality try-on technologies. For decades, the fitting room has been the most intimate site of retail, the moment when desire confronts reality. But fitting rooms are also sources of friction, limited sizes, poor lighting, lack of privacy. Generative AI enhances AR try-on by creating hyper-real simulations of garments on consumers' bodies. Using a phone camera or in-store smart mirror, a shopper can see not just a flat overlay of clothing, but a dynamic rendering that accounts for body shape, fabric movement, and even lighting conditions. AI can simulate how a dress will shimmer in daylight versus evening, or how a jacket will drape while walking. This experience collapses the boundary between digital and physical. Consumers can try on hundreds of outfits without ever entering a fitting room. More radically, they can try on garments that do not yet exist physically. AI-generated designs tested virtually before production. In this sense, the fitting room becomes a laboratory of co-creation, where consumers participate in shaping the collection itself. The psychological effect is profound. Try-on ceases to be constrained by inventory or logistics. It becomes infinite possibility. The store transforms into a space of imagination rather than limitation. Part 3. Algorithmic curation of product displays. The third domain is algorithmic curation. Traditionally, window displays and in-store arrangements were crafted by visual merchandisers, drawing on artistry and brand DNA. Generative AI now allows displays to be curated algorithmically, drawing on consumer data in real time. Imagine a store where product arrangements shift dynamically depending on who enters. Sensors detect demographic indicators, age, gender presentation, even mood inferred from gait, and the displays adjust accordingly. One consumer sees a display emphasizing minimalist neutrals. Another sees bold streetwear palettes. Digital signage adapts instantly, generating new imagery and slogans tailored to the detected profile. On a broader scale, algorithmic curation allows for microclimate merchandising. A store in Tokyo may emphasize rainwear on a humid day. A store in Sao Paulo may highlight evening wear based on local event calendars. Displays are no longer static sets. They are adaptive narratives generated moment by moment. This level of personalization blurs the line between store and website. Just as online platforms recommend products algorithmically, physical stores now become algorithmically responsive environments, spaces that curate themselves around the consumer. Part 4. Psychological impact on consumer journeys. Now let us consider the psychology. Shopping has always been about more than acquisition. It is about the journey of desire. The store guides consumers through stages: attraction, exploration, trial, purchase. Generative AI reshapes each stage. The attraction stage begins before entry, with AI-generated window displays that shift according to time of day, weather, and foot traffic. Exploration is enhanced by layouts that adapt dynamically to movement patterns. Trial is transformed by AR fitting and personalized recommendations. Purchase is streamlined by AI checkout systems, some invisible altogether. The psychological impact is one of frictionless immersion. The consumer feels seen, anticipated, even co-authored within the retail experience. Yet there is also a risk. When every step is optimized algorithmically, spontaneity and human serendipity may be reduced. The journey becomes a script, carefully orchestrated by unseen systems. Here we must ask, is this empowerment or manipulation? Does personalization make consumers feel valued, or does it quietly steer them toward predetermined outcomes? The line between curation and control is delicate. Part 5. Labor displacement. We must also address the question of labor. Visual merchandisers, retail designers, and sales associates have historically shaped the in-store experience. With generative AI, many of these functions can be automated. Algorithms can design layouts, AR systems can substitute for fitting assistants, and predictive displays can reduce the need for human intervention. This raises the specter of labor displacement. Entire categories of creative retail labor may be diminished, yet it also creates opportunities for new forms of labor. AI supervisors, ethical curators, and human storytellers who provide depth beyond algorithmic surfaces. The key issue is whether AI augments or replaces human creativity. Will we see a hybrid model where human merchandisers collaborate with AI systems? Or will corporations seize the efficiency gains to reduce staff, flattening the artistry of retail into purely algorithmic spectacle? Part 6. The store as theater in the hyper-real economy. Finally, we must address the symbolic shift. The store has always been a theater. Think of the grand arcades of Paris, the staged window displays of Harrods, or the immersive flagships of Louis Vuitton. These were stages where the drama of fashion was performed. Generative AI reconfigures the theater itself. The store is no longer a fixed stage, but a procedural simulation, an environment that rewrites itself continuously. This marks a shift into the hyper-real. Baudrillard would remind us that in the hyper-real, signs no longer refer to reality but to other signs. In AI-driven retail, the product on display may not exist in physical form. The outfit you try on in AR may never be manufactured. The layout you navigate may dissolve overnight into another. The store ceases to be a stable stage and becomes a living algorithmic fiction. This shift raises profound symbolic questions. Is the store still a site of cultural memory, or has it become a stream of generated surfaces? Does the consumer participate in theater, or are they caught in an endless simulation designed for engagement metrics? And yet, the theatricality remains powerful. For many consumers, the magic of walking into a store that adapts around them is exhilarating. The store as theater is not disappearing. It is mutating into a theater of code, a spectacle of generative possibility. Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? Generative AI in fashion retail environments transforms space into simulation, trial into imagination, and display into algorithmic curation. It offers unprecedented personalization and sustainability, but it also raises concerns about manipulation, labor displacement, and the erosion of spontaneity. The psychological impact is double-edged. Consumers feel empowered by immersive experiences yet subtly steered by predictive systems. The symbolic impact is profound. The store as theater becomes the store as hyper-real algorithm. The future of fashion retail will not be decided by technology alone, but by how we, as designers, consumers, and critics, choose to shape these environments. Will AI enrich the theatricality of retail, or will it reduce it to hollow spectacle? Will it augment human creativity, or will it displace it? These are not technical questions. They are cultural, ethical, and symbolic. And they remind us that even in an AI-driven world, fashion retail remains what it has always been, a stage where society negotiates identity, desire, and meaning. Ethical dilemmas in generative fashion. Marketing fashion, as an industry, has always been entangled with questions of power, representation, and responsibility. It has celebrated creativity and innovation, but it has also been implicated in cultural exploitation, labor injustice, and environmental harm. With the rise of generative artificial intelligence in fashion marketing, these dilemmas are not erased. They are intensified, reframed, and accelerated. AI gives us extraordinary tools, the ability to generate campaigns at scale, to create infinitely diverse imagery, and to personalize consumer experiences in ways unimaginable a decade ago. Yet these same tools raise pressing ethical questions that we must not ignore. In today's lecture, I will explore 4 domains of ethical concern in generative fashion marketing. First, cultural appropriation, where AI systems replicate cultural motifs without acknowledgement or accountability. Second, body image distortion, where algorithmically generated imagery risks reinforcing harmful ideals. Third, labor rights displacement, as generative systems automate roles traditionally performed by human workers. Fourth, data exploitation, in which consumer and creative datasets are harvested to feed AI models without consent. Having mapped these dilemmas, I will then move to possible pathways forward, frameworks for responsible AI, potential policy interventions, and finally, the argument that ethics itself can function as an innovation driver, pushing the industry toward deeper creativity, inclusivity, and trust. Part 1. Cultural appropriation in generative systems. Cultural appropriation is not new to fashion. From indigenous headdresses on luxury runways to the commodification of African prints in Western collections, the industry has long faced accusations of extracting cultural forms without acknowledgement. Generative AI complicates this further. AI systems are trained on vast data sets, images scraped from magazines, social media, museums, archives. When these data sets include cultural artifacts, the algorithm may replicate them without context. A generative model may produce, for example, a bohemian dress pattern that borrows heavily from Andean textiles or Maasai beadwork without recognizing their sacred or communal significance. Unlike a human designer, the AI has no awareness of cultural ownership, no capacity for respect, no instinct for context. Its task is simply recombination. The result is a heightened risk of algorithmic appropriation, where exploitation is not deliberate but systemic. The ethical question is clear. If fashion brands use generative AI trained on global cultural datasets, how can they ensure proper acknowledgement, attribution, and compensation? Without frameworks for cultural stewardship, generative fashion risks reproducing colonial logics of extraction in digital form. Part 2. Body image distortion. Fashion marketing has long shaped body ideals, often narrowly, often harmfully. Generative AI can both challenge and reinforce these patterns. On the one hand, AI has the potential to diversify representation. It can generate models of different body types, ages, genders, ethnicities, and abilities. It can provide inclusive imagery at scale, reducing the historic dominance of a singular Eurocentric ideal. On the other hand, if datasets are biased, dominated by thin, young Eurocentric images, then AI will reproduce those biases, sometimes even exaggerating them. Moreover, AI-generated models may appear perfected, skin smoothed, proportions idealized, bodies without marks of reality. The danger is the creation of an even more unrealistic beauty standard, not merely unattainable for most people, but unattainable for any human being at all. The psychological consequences are serious. Consumers, especially younger audiences, may internalize these synthetic ideals, leading to body dissatisfaction, eating disorders, or distorted self-image. Thus, while generative AI offers tools for representation, It also intensifies the ethical responsibility of brands to ensure inclusivity and realism. Part 3. Labor rights and displacement. Another ethical dilemma is labor. Fashion marketing relies on a vast ecosystem of creative labor: photographers, models, makeup artists, stylists, graphic designers, and more. Generative AI. I can replicate much of this work. A single system can now generate an entire campaign: models posed, garments rendered, settings designed, captions written. The efficiency is undeniable. Brands save costs and gain speed, but the consequence is displacement of human workers. Photographers lose commissions, models lose bookings, stylists lose opportunities to craft narratives. This is not simply a matter of economic disruption. It is a matter of justice. Who bears the cost of automation? Which forms of labor are devalued? Some argue that AI will free human creatives for higher-level work, enabling them to become directors and curators rather than executors. This is possible, but only if companies consciously design workflows that integrate human creativity rather than replace it. Without deliberate intervention, the risk is widespread precarity in creative industries already known for instability. The ethical imperative, then, is to ensure that AI does not become a tool of creative dispossession, but rather a collaborator that augments and expands human labor. Part 4. Data exploitation. Finally, we must confront the issue of data. Generative AI requires massive training data sets. In fashion, this often includes images scraped from magazines, lookbooks, and even individual creators' social media feeds. These are frequently used without consent, compensation, or transparency. The ethical problem here is twofold. First, the exploitation of creative labor. Independent designers or photographers may find their work folded into data sets that train AI models, only for those models to generate content that competes with them. Second, the exploitation of consumer data. Behavioral histories, purchase patterns, and personal images used to train systems that then generate targeted marketing content. This raises profound questions about consent and ownership. Who owns the data of cultural imagery? Who has the right to profit from it? And how can consumers trust brands if their personal data becomes raw material for generative systems without clear boundaries? Without ethical data governance, generative fashion marketing risks becoming another site of digital extraction, exploiting both creators and consumers. Part 5. Frameworks for responsible AI. Having mapped these dilemmas, we must now consider responses. Ethical challenges demand not just critique, but frameworks for responsibility. Several principles are emerging globally. 1. Transparency. Brands must disclose when imagery or campaigns are generated by AI and which datasets were used. Transparency builds trust. 2. Consent and attribution. Creators and communities whose work informs AI training must be credited and compensated. 3. Bias auditing. Systems must be regularly tested to detect and correct representational biases. 4. Human oversight. AI should augment, not replace, human creativity. Campaigns should include human judgment to provide context and care. 5. Inclusivity by design. AI systems should be trained intentionally on diverse datasets, curated with equity in mind. These frameworks move us toward an ethical practice of generative fashion marketing, one that acknowledges risks while fostering innovation. Part 6. Policy interventions. Beyond voluntary frameworks, there is a role for policy. Governments and regulatory bodies are beginning to consider how AI should be governed. For fashion marketing, relevant interventions may include copyright reform, clarifying ownership of data used for AI training; right to disclosure, requiring brands to identify AI-generated content; labor protections, ensuring that creative workers displaced by AI have access to retraining, support, or integration into new roles; cultural heritage protection, safeguarding traditional designs from algorithmic exploitation; data privacy laws, regulating how consumer data is harvested and used. Such policies are not restrictive burdens, but necessary guardrails, ensuring that innovation does not come at the cost of justice and dignity. Part 7. Ethics as innovation driver. Finally, let us invert the framing. Ethics is not only about risk mitigation, it can also be a driver of innovation. Brands that lead with ethics, those that prioritize inclusivity, transparency, and cultural respect, stand to gain competitive advantage. Consumers are increasingly savvy. They reward trust and authenticity. Consider how sustainability shifted from a niche concern to a mainstream innovation driver in fashion. Ethical A. I may follow a similar trajectory. Companies that develop responsible generative systems, celebrating diversity, compensating creators, respecting consumers, will not only avoid scandal but also differentiate themselves as leaders. Ethics, in this sense, is not a constraint but a creative frontier. It pushes brands to think more deeply about representation, to imagine new models of collaboration, and to design AI systems that reflect not only technical brilliance, but also cultural care. Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? Generative AI in fashion marketing presents dazzling possibilities: infinite creativity, dynamic personalization, global reach. Yet it also confronts us with profound dilemmas: cultural appropriation, body distortion, labor displacement, and data exploitation. Our task is not to abandon these tools, but to govern them wisely. Through responsible frameworks, thoughtful policy, and ethical imagination, we can ensure that generative AI becomes not a force of exploitation, but a catalyst for more inclusive, respectful, and innovative fashion futures. Fashion has always been about more than clothing. It is about identity, culture, and meaning. With AI, this truth is amplified. The question is whether we will use these technologies to deepen fashion's cultural richness or to hollow it out into endless, careless simulation. The answer depends on our choices, our ethics, and our imagination. Intellectual property in AI-generated fashion designs. Let us begin. Fashion has always occupied a strange place in the legal landscape of intellectual property. Unlike literature, unlike film, unlike software, fashion design has historically been difficult to protect under copyright law. A garment is often treated not as a creative work, but as a utilitarian object. This lack of robust protection has shaped the industry. Designers rely on speed, branding, and cultural capital rather than on strong legal monopolies. Now, enter generative artificial intelligence. Algorithms that can produce clothing patterns, silhouettes, textures, and even entire collections are disrupting not only the creative process, but also the legal assumptions underlying intellectual property. Who owns an AI-generated design? Can a machine be an author? If a brand uses AI to generate hundreds of garment prototypes, which ones are protectable? If an algorithm recombines millions of copyrighted works in its training data, is the output derivative or original? In this lecture, I want to address these questions systematically. We will cover three main domains of IP law: copyright, trademark, and patent. We will explore case studies of disputes already emerging in courts and industry debates. We will analyze the tension between human authorship and machine output. And finally, we will consider the emerging legal frameworks being debated globally, with an eye to how they may reshape the future of fashion. Part 1. Copyright and algorithmic creation. Copyright is the most obvious form of intellectual property for creative works. It protects original expressions fixed in a tangible medium. But copyright law has a core assumption: it protects human authorship. When an AI generates a fashion design, who is the author? The programmer who built the algorithm, the user who entered the prompt, the company that owns the data set, or no one at all? In the United States, the Copyright Office has stated clearly that works created without human involvement are not copyrightable. In 2022, the office rejected an attempt to copyright an AI-generated artwork on the grounds that it lacked human authorship. Similarly, in the United Kingdom and the European Union, current frameworks privilege human creators. For fashion, this creates a dilemma. If a brand generates a garment entirely via algorithm, it may not receive copyright protection. Competitors may copy the design freely. But if a human designer uses AI as a tool, curating prompts, editing outputs, refining prototypes, there may be enough human involvement to claim authorship. The legal boundary is blurry. How much human input is sufficient? Case study. Consider a brand that uses an AI to generate 10,000 dress designs. A human curator selects one, modifies it slightly, and produces it physically. If challenged, courts may hold that the human-curated elements qualify for copyright, but the underlying AI-generated portions remain ineligible. This hybrid authorship problem is at the heart of generative IP disputes. Part 2. Trademarks and brand identity. Trademarks function differently. They protect symbols of origin, logos, brand names, trade dress, that identify goods in commerce. In fashion, trademarks are often more valuable than copyrights because they protect brand recognition. The Nike swoosh, the Louis Vuitton monogram, the Burberry plaid. Generative AI complicates trademark law in two ways. First, AI can generate logos, patterns, and brand-like elements that may inadvertently resemble existing marks. A system trained on thousands of logos might output a design confusingly similar to Adidas stripes or Chanel's double C, creating legal risk. Second, AI-generated trade dress blurs the line between originality and imitation. Suppose an AI generates a handbag design strongly evocative of Hermès. Even if unintentional, it may dilute Hermès's brand identity. The key question becomes, can brands enforce trademark rights against outputs created by machines? Courts have not yet resolved this, but early disputes in related industries suggest they may treat AI outputs like any other infringing design, regardless of intent. Moreover, generative AI allows brands to experiment rapidly with new visual identities, creating a trademark explosion. If companies file hundreds of marks generated algorithmically, trademark registries may face overload, forcing regulators to reconsider how marks are examined and granted. Part 3. Patents and functional innovation. Patents protect inventions, functional innovations, not aesthetic designs. In fashion, this might cover new fabrics, wearable technologies, or unique manufacturing processes. Generative AI enters the patent arena when it proposes functional garment innovations, self-cooling fabrics, algorithmically optimized stitching patterns, or smart textile integrations. Here, the key issue is inventorship. Patent law requires that an inventor be a natural person. In multiple jurisdictions, inventors have attempted to list AI systems, such as DABUS, a well-known AI, in patent applications. Courts in the US, UK, and EU have all rejected these claims, ruling that only humans can be inventors. This raises profound questions. If an AI proposes a novel fastening mechanism or textile process, but no human meaningfully contributes, the invention may fall outside patent protection. Companies may respond by attributing inventorship to the human operator, but this creates legal and ethical ambiguities. Is it honest to claim human invention when the idea came from a machine? In fashion, this problem may accelerate as AI tools move beyond aesthetics to functional design optimization. Imagine an algorithm that develops a new weaving technique reducing waste by 40%. Without clear inventorship rules, such breakthroughs may remain legally vulnerable. Part 4. Case studies of disputes. Already, we see disputes emerging. Getty Images versus Stability. While not fashion-specific, this lawsuit illustrates the core issue. Getty claims Stability AI used millions of copyrighted images without permission to train its model. A parallel could easily arise in fashion. If an AI is trained on Vogue archives or luxury lookbooks, are the resulting outputs derivative works? Thaler's AI artwork cases. Stephen Thaler, creator of Dabus, has repeatedly sought IP protection for AI-generated works. Courts have consistently rejected machine authorship. These cases will shape fashion's future as similar claims arise over AI-generated garments. Designer versus algorithm. Consider a hypothetical but likely scenario. An independent designer alleges that a fast fashion giant used AI trained on her portfolio to generate imitative designs. Does the designer have recourse? Current copyright law may struggle to protect her, especially if the outputs are transformative, but visually similar. These disputes highlight the legal vacuum in which generative fashion operates. Part 5. The human-machine tension in IP law. At the heart of these issues lies a philosophical tension. IP law is built on the notion of human creativity. Copyright, trademark, and patent systems assume that humans originate ideas, and the law rewards them with exclusive rights. Generative AI disrupts this model. Machines can now produce works indistinguishable from human creations, but they do so without intention, without consciousness, without cultural context. Should such outputs be protected? If so, who should benefit? The programmer? The prompt engineer? The company? Or should AI-generated works remain in the public domain, open for all to use? This tension will not be resolved easily. Some scholars argue that treating AI as an author undermines the human-centered foundation of IP law. Others contend that without protection, businesses will lack incentives to invest in generative design. Fashion magnifies this tension because of its speed and visibility. If AI-generated designs flood the market, can human designers still rely on IP law to protect their work? Or will they be forced to compete in an open arena where authorship has collapsed? Part 6. Emerging legal frameworks. Globally, policymakers are beginning to respond. In the European Union, the proposed AI Act includes provisions for transparency in generative outputs, though it does not directly resolve IP ownership. In the United States, the Copyright Office is exploring guidelines for works with mixed human-AI authorship, requiring disclosure of AI involvement. In China, courts have begun recognizing limited copyright in AI-generated works if substantial human input is demonstrated. The World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, has launched consultations on AI and IP, signaling that international frameworks may eventually emerge. What is clear is that the legal landscape is in flux. Some predict the creation of a new category of rights, neighboring rights for AI outputs, granting limited protection without full authorship. Others advocate expanding existing frameworks to accommodate hybrid human-machine creativity. For fashion, the outcome of these debates will determine whether generative design becomes a commons of free expression or a new field of proprietary control. Part 7. Implications for the fashion industry. What does all this mean for fashion practitioners? 1. Strategic ambiguity. For now, brands must navigate uncertainty. Some may exploit the legal vacuum by mass-producing AI designs, assuming that enforcement will be weak. Others may invest in human-AI collaborations that strengthen claims of authorship. 2. Ethical considerations. Beyond legality, there is legitimacy. Brands that appropriate designs via AI without acknowledgement risk reputational harm. Transparency about AI involvement may become a trust-building strategy. 3. Competitive landscape. Smaller designers may face new threats from AI-enabled fast fashion, which can replicate styles rapidly, but they may also find opportunity by using AI themselves to prototype and expand creativity. 4. Symbolic shifts. The very meaning of designer may shift. In a world of generative fashion, is the designer still the originator, or are they now a curator of machine possibilities? Closing reflections. So where does this leave us? Generative AI in fashion design challenges the very foundations of intellectual property law. Copyright struggles with authorship. Trademark grapples with brand dilution. Patent law resists non-human inventors. Case studies reveal disputes already brewing, and policymakers scramble to keep up. At the heart of it all is the tension between human creativity and machine output. The law was built for one. Reality now demands recognition of the other. Fashion, with its speed, visibility, and cultural power, sits at the center of this shift. The future may bring hybrid frameworks, new categories of rights, or even radical redefinitions of authorship itself. What is certain is that intellectual property, once a stable cornerstone of creative industries, has become a contested frontier. And in this frontier, fashion is not merely an industry adjusting to law. It is a stage upon which society negotiates what it means to create, to own, and to be human in an age of generative machines.